another episode of Drafters TV presented by Drafters Fantasy Sports. My name is Ben Hauver. I am the host of this show. If you're unaware, Drafters is the premier site for best ball drafting. Best ball is an innovative format of fantasy football that focuses on one thing and one thing only, drafting. You don't set lineups, you don't make trades, and you don't pick up free agents. In best ball, you have one responsibility: to draft the best team. At the end of every week, your highest producing player will automatically be entered into your starting lineup, and you will compete with your league mates to score the most points over a 16-week season. You can download the Drafters app now for both iOS and Android, where you will find best ball drafts for as low as $1.11, all the way up to the 109s if you are a big baller. New leagues are starting all the time, so get out there and get drafting. On today's show, I am going to be joined by Peter Overzet for the final episode in our series dedicated to debating these positional rankings. If you missed out on any of the previous episodes, they're all available on this YouTube channel. You can go back and peruse our thoughts on quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. Today, we're going to delve deep on tight ends, while our position-by-position breakdown series is over the unstoppable stream of fantasy football content that just constantly radiates in my brain is not. So make sure you mash that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and don't miss out on a single piece of Drafters content. We've got a lot more coming. Now, for the final time, I would like to welcome to the show Peter Overzet. Peter, how are you doing?
Doing good, man. I feel like we've been on this journey, weaving our way through all of these positions, and now we were at the end. It's kind of like, when you go to summer camp as a kid and we're all huddling around the bonfire for our final ceremony, the tight ends.
Yes, the most exciting position in fantasy football, said nobody ever. But we're going to try and do what we can to make it interesting. And, look, tight end is the driest fantasy position out there. What I mean by that is that, there are fewer fantasy viable players at the tight end position than any other position in fantasy. We're going to take a look at the top guys in a second here, Peter, but the only question I have for you before we kick things off is an important one. How many tight ends do you feel comfortable taking as the tight end one of a two tight end roster construction for best ball? So, in other words, what is the threshold for a two tight end build in best ball? Is there a threshold? Are you going to draft three all the time? Or, is there a number of guys that you'll take that would make you feel comfortable in only drafting two for best ball?
Yeah, it's interesting because I do prefer, again, kind of based on the studies that RotoViz has done with win rates over the past 5 years, getting one of those elite tight ends early has been very profitable from an ROI standpoint. So that's something when they are presented to me, Kittle or Kelce, and we'll even talk about some of these other guys that I'll consider early. When they're there, I definitely want to do that. And then to your point, to me, the question of two or three comes down to when you're getting that second one. This year, I think there's a lot of really interesting upside tight ends. Like I'm looking at your rankings. We're going to talk about these guys in the kind of 9 to 17, 18 range, where they could take that leap into top 6, top 7 territory, and I'm trying to get one of those. But in a format where we don't have to worry about kickers and defense, I still think of the onesie positions as positions where I might as well cover my bases and get three. But I will say this puts me in a tough bind from my personal construction because I generally like to go running back in the first round and then really punt running back for a while. So I'm often having to make the hard choice to add another running back, or do I want a third tight end? So I think you can make cases for both, and I think it does come down to where are you drafting these tight ends, and do you need a third one to really cover yourself?
Yeah, that's really interesting. For me, in terms of roster construction and best ball, I'm either going to be taking two quarterbacks and three tight ends, or I'm going to be taking, three quarterbacks and two tight ends. I look at those positions as really the ones that I'm going to be flexible with in terms of my construction and dependent on the first guy I get. If I reach on taking a top 5 quarterback, if I'm taking Dak Prescott, I'm going to wait on tight ends because I think that going early on both positions really weakens you at the important positions of running back and wide receiver. And that's just sort of how I look at it. But let's dive into these rankings, and we can talk a little bit more about like where our thresholds are, how we view these tiers. And starting off with the top 5 guys, I have my top 5 ranked in the exact same order that they're going in ADP, which is the first time that this has happened in any of our videos on this series. Travis Kelce 1, George Kittle 2, Zach Ertz 3, Mark Andrews 4, and Darren Waller at 5. Do you have any issue with my rankings / the ADP in drafters leagues?
No, I guess I will. I'll make my one change that I would make, and I personally will be drafting Mark Andrews ahead of Zach Ertz this year. But otherwise, I would have it the exact same as your rankings and the ADP minus that switch. To me, it is what Mark Andrews showed us last year as that alpha target hog in the Ravens offense. He's tied to Lamar Jackson. He really isn't threatened by any other kind of volume producers. Whereas I look at Zach Ertz, he's getting older. He doesn't have much yards after catch appeal. They add Rager. We also are another year into Goddard's career, who I think is even a better like physical talent than Ertz. So I worry about Ertz sustaining the volume needed to hold at 3. Again, I think he's still a great high floor pick, but Mark Andrews, I just like his ceiling better. I think they probably have similar floors, and I think Andrews has a bit higher ceiling, so that's why I'm going there.
The thing about Mark Andrews, in my opinion, is that everything based on the numbers makes me want to rank him lower and makes me want to believe that he is not going to replicate what he did last year. Because look, he was the only top 5 tight end to have under 100 targets. He was the only tight end in the top 5 to have under 85 catches last year, and he was well below that benchmark with only 64. In general, when a player has a large percentage of their fantasy production come from touchdowns, which we know is one of the least sticky statistics year over year, you almost have to assume that regression is coming. And, we talked about it many times throughout this series. I'm thinking off the top of my head, Aaron Jones is a player like that who, if you expect the touchdowns to come down, you have to drop them in your ranks. That being said, Mark Andrews, like you said, he's basically the alpha attached to Lamar Jackson. So that's something to like. And his catches and his targets, they could go up, realistically, if the Ravens pass more, which they most likely will. I think that those numbers could rise even if the touchdowns sort of drop a little bit. But, how do you feel about that? Do you think that maybe there is a chance that Mark Andrews regresses a little more than we're expecting? Or is he there? Is he locked in? Is he safe in the top 5?
I think he's pretty safe. When you really consider the year he had last year, not to mention he was hampered by injury a lot. He's turning 24 in September. He had 10 weekly finishes as a tight end 1 last season, even though Baltimore ranked number 31 and number 32 in pass attempts. So the overall volume didn't limit him, and it's kind of the same thing we've been talking about with Marquise Brown in our wide receiver show, that if even the volume just upticks a little bit, he's going to be able to offset even a regression in efficiency, because he finished top 5 in targets, receiving yards, air yards at the position while leading all tight ends and TDs. So just like the ceiling there with a little bit more volume, a little more health, with Lamar Jackson taking another step as a passer, that's upside that I still want to chase, and I think there's enough mitigating factors to offset him regressing in efficiency.
Yeah, that's very fair. How do you feel about Darren Waller? Because he's kind of the opposite in terms of, he's not attached to an elite quarterback. He hasn't proved that he has that touchdown upside. In a vacuum, you would expect him to see some positive regression in the sense that, he scored 7 less times than Mark Andrews on 26 more catches. That is something that is not something in line with expectations, I guess, if you looked at their numbers. So, is Darren Waller legit? Is there a concern that it was a one-year wonder based on the lack of weapons that Oakland had, something that they seem to have fixed in this offseason, or at least they made the attempt to? Or is Darren Waller, part of this group now? Is he going to be in the top 5, top 6 year over year for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, so I don't mind the ranking or the ADP, but I will say there's a big tier break for me after those top four, to the point where I'm probably not going to have hardly any Darren Waller on my teams this year, both from an ADP standpoint and a roster construction standpoint, where I don't view him as one of those elite difference makers. You know, if we were getting the Darren Waller we got for the first half of the season last year, you could make the case for him to be in that elite tier. But one, he faded down the stretch last year, and he wasn't sustaining that insane target pace, which is really what made him so attractive. Is he was like operating as the number one wide receiver in that offense, and then obviously he has the physical skill set to really produce after the catch. But when those targets dropped, he really became just these middling average tight end, and then they go in and bring draft Ruggs with their first pick, and I think you just have to wonder if he can sustain the kind of target volume you need to truly be one of these elite guys. I mean, because when we talk Kelce, Kittle, Ertz, and Andrews, these guys all have the capability to have 10 to 12 targets a game. Like, that is within their range of outcomes. They function as the number one pass option in their offenses. I don't know if that's going to be the case for Waller again this year.
That's fair. So going back to the question that we started the show off with, is your threshold 4 tight ends? If you get one of those top 4 guys for you in Andrews, Ertz, Kittle, or Kelce, you'll aim to go with a 2 tight end build, and that's sort of it for you?
Yeah, I mean, I also have to, full disclosure, again, over the course of this series, I've been referencing the drafters industry draft I did. I took George Kittle in the second round. I came and got Noah Fant in the 11th, and I did end up taking Sternberger in the 16th because I waited just a little bit longer on my second tight end, where I love Noah Fant's upside, but with all the weapons they added, it gave me just enough pause to be like, I want to add one more safety net here. But say if I grab George Kittle in the second, and sorry, to answer your question, yes, those 4 tight ends qualify as tight ends that I would be willing to just pair with one other tight end. I was just going to say, though, that if I am only going with 2 tight ends, I want to grab that second tight end from your, I'm looking at your rankings, from your kind of top 12 guys. So I want to then come back and pair him with a Hawkinson, a Gesicki, a Higbee, a Henry, all guys I like a lot, and then I'm done. But I pushed it just a teeny bit further, and I felt I liked Sternberger over some of the other options there. So it is a really thin line, but I do think if you're grabbing one of these tight ends, you should be using that as a luxury to free up only having to draft two total tight ends.
Yeah, that's fair. And let's get into that tier that you were referencing. This next group, guys 6 through 12 in order. Evan Engram 6, Austin Hooper 7, Hayden Hurst at 8, TJ Hawkinson at 9, Mike Gesicki at 10, Higbee 11, and then Hunter Henry down at 12. And the thing with this tier, in my opinion, is that just about every single one of these guys has about the same exact chance to finish as the tight end 6 right behind the big 5 that we were referencing. I don't want my first tight end to come in this group if I'm planning on taking 2 tight ends. But if I'm taking 3 tight ends, I absolutely want somebody from this group. I don't want to wait after this group to get my first tight end in any scenario.
Yep, I agree with that, and I do like this stretch here. I, at cost, am going to be avoiding Engram, Hooper, and Hurst. It's both a price thing and, again, like I said, a roster construction. I love the wide receivers in that range where those guys are being drafted, to where I'm going to be taking, DJ Chark, Tyler Boyd, Christian Kirk over them. But that said, I love the Hawkinson, Gesicki, Higbee, Henry, Fant crew. Like, all of those guys both have the ability to command more targets. In the case of Hawkinson and Gesicki, they are, these physically gifted guys that have kind of the outlier size speed combinations when we're all trying to find that next Gronk, that next Kelce, Kittle. I think Hawkinson and Gesicki have that ability. And then with Higbee and Henry, you can really hang your hat on some really good volume heading their way as well. So I love that tier of guys, and I'd be trying to get one of, say, those 4 or 5 guys on most of my best ball teams, almost regardless of the overall construction.
Yeah, I love what I'm hearing you say about TJ Hawkinson. I've got him all the way up as my tight end 9. He's going at 18. So while I have him ranked this highly, again, going back to what we've talked about in just about every single episode, you can get him much, much later. And for that reason, I think that TJ Hawkinson will likely be my highest owned tight end when it's all said and done. Do you think that I'm too bullish with this ranking, putting him in the top 10 when his ADP puts him at tight end 18?
Nope. I would have him right there too. I think people are forgetting what a great prospect he was. We even saw him in week 1 last year against Arizona. He had a great week, and then he just kind of became victim to this Matt Patricia run first, 3-headed running back committee, and also the fact that they had some good wide receiver options. They were really down the stretch. They were prioritizing Danny Amendola, and there just wasn't a ton of targets for him. But I guess someone might be able to twist that argument around on me and be like, well, why wasn't he commanding targets over Amendola? But tight ends have always been slow starters for fantasy production. It's taken a couple years for them to kind of mature, and I think Hawkinson has the ability to really break out here in a way that we see from guys with his pedigree who are taken in the first round. So yeah, I'm very excited on Hawkinson, and I think they need it. I think he can be that second wide receiver option behind Kenny Golladay. I think this is the year he surpasses Marvin Jones and Amendola or whatever other, wide receiver 3 they're tossing out there.
I agree with every word that you just said, and not even to mention that Matthew Stafford missed the entire second half of that year. So, Stafford was playing great. If you pair that with him coming back healthy, Hawkinson being in his second year, which is something that we love to see for tight ends taking the next step. He has top 10 NFL draft capital on a team whose GM and coach are likely gone if they don't start producing this year. They're going to need their first round pick from last year to show some life. And yeah, Marvin Jones, look, I love the guy, but he's 30 years old. Danny Amendola's ancient. And they have Geronimo Allison as a wide receiver 4 for that team. I would not be surprised at all to see Hawkinson finish 3rd or 2nd in targets on this team if things go well for him. And yeah, that's why I'm super bullish on the ranking. Conversely, I've got Hunter Henry much lower than consensus. I've got him down at 12. He's just on the edge of what I would consider to be a tight end 1. He's going as the tight end 7 in drafts right behind Evan Engram. Am I too low on Hunter Henry? How do you feel about this ranking?
Yeah, Hunter Henry is tough. It's, with the quarterback change, I think there are some question marks, but Hunter Henry is another guy that as a prospect and what he's done when he's healthy is always been impressive, and he's always commanded targets. And whether that's Tyrod Taylor or whether that is Justin Herbert, I think the tight end is going to be an attractive target for them. Tyrod Taylor, he relied heavily on Charles Clay there for a while in Buffalo, and we know rookie tight ends rookie quarterbacks like to rely on tight ends. So once you factor all that in, I think Hunter Henry is a nice value. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I like where you have him ranked. I know he's going as the 7th tight end off the board. I don't love that price, and like I said, that's a range where I'm not traditionally taking tight ends. But if he were to slip, into that kind of 8th, 9th round where I'm taking him as my 2nd tight end, then I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. I mean, I don't want to spend a top 70 pick on a guy who, it's just going to be the amount of targets he's going to get, the share of targets in that offense he's going to get is so wildly unpredictable. I think that it's very reasonable to expect him to be the 4th top target at best behind Williams, Keenan, and Austin Eckler. And for that reason, I see people like, Gesicki, Hawkinson, even Hayden Hurst on a new team in Atlanta having the opportunity to carve out more, significant and more guaranteed roles on a week-to-week basis than I see for Hunter Henry.
Right. And again, the other thing from a roster construction standpoint, like you grouped this chunk tight end 6 to 12, and I in my personal rankings maybe extend it a little bit further to Noah Fant, but I think this tier is pretty flat. And I'd rather let Engram, Hooper, Hurst, Henry go off the board, and then I'll just get whoever's available of those guys we talked about, Hawkinson, Gesicki, Higbee, Fant, where I feel like I'm getting both upside and a good price. I don't feel like I need to trigger that tight end run there, knowing like most likely none of these guys are going to break into the top 4 tier, but I don't think any of them separate each other in a meaningful way to be the one to take them first. So yeah, I want to be grabbing the tight end 11 or 12 off the board, not 6, 7, or 8.
Yeah, that's fair. The last guy on this tier I want to hit on is Austin Hooper. He was 3rd in fantasy points per game for tight end last year, and he finished as the tight end 6 despite missing 3 games. He leaves one high-powered offense to another offense that should be high-powered. I have him ranked 7th. He's going 8th. I think that there's a good chance that he can be for David Njoku, or he can be for Baker Mayfield what David Njoku was supposed to be, essentially. And, a theme through all of the episodes we've done here is that I'm high on the Browns. I was high on Odell. I was high on Landry. I was even high on Kareem Hunt. I was high on Baker Mayfield. I'm high on this offense in general. There's a pretty good chance that at least one of those will be wrong because they can't all be great, or can they? What do you think?
Yeah, I was gonna call you out on your Cleveland Browns truther status. I like we were talking about all of the positional pieces on the team as individual talents. I think they're all good. I don't know though if they are going to be able to all command targets at a rate that makes them fantasy viable consistently week to week. Of course, we enter the beauty of best ball. You don't necessarily have to guess, but I think Austin Hooper's production is going to be a little bit more sporadic this year than it was in Atlanta when we really saw him have a leap last year, especially at the beginning of the year. So, yeah, I don't mind Austin Hooper, but like I said, he's just a guy that I would rather wait on. If he slips to tight end 10, 11, then I think you're getting good value, but otherwise it's a little pricey. And again, we've talked about the offensive philosophies with these teams. We've talked about 3 intriguing wide, pass catching options in Odell, Landry, and Hooper, but this team still wants to use Chubb above all. And that is what has me a little worried about investing in their tight end this early, not to mention the question marks around how Baker played last year. So yes, I can see it all coming together. I think there's a greater than non-zero chance it does, but I think there's a decent amount of risk in Hooper at this price.
Yeah, that's fair. It's also important to understand that, if you're drafting multiple best ball leagues, like I'm talking many, many best ball leagues, the way that I do, the way that I'm not sure, Peter, but are you a high volume drafter?
I normally fall somewhere in between. I am definitely not one of those persons that is doing hundreds of drafts. I would say I normally fall in like the, 20 to 25 range each year.
So, yeah, that's fair. But, even if you're drafting 20, 25, 30 leagues, it's like you want the upside of your roster to be correlated like with reality, basically. So, you always hear the expression in DFS, you want your lineup to tell a story, right? So you want your roster to sort of tell a story as well. If I'm drafting Austin Hooper as a top 7 tight end, I'm probably not going to draft Jarvis Landry as well on that same team because I think Austin Hooper is going to carve a role and vice versa. So I just think it's important to, make sure you know what each pick is representing from a roster construction standpoint. And, if you want to go Austin Hooper on one team, that's fine. Go Jarvis Landry on another team so that you are sort of, getting equity in both plays, whichever way it ends up playing out.
Another thing I think about a lot with tight ends, right, is, well, first of all, we all agree volume is the lifeblood of fantasy scoring. We want guys that are getting 10-plus targets. We don't even care if they're that talented, if they're getting 10-plus targets. It's, again, why we were rostering someone like Danny Amendola in DFS last year because he was getting the volume. But when I'm looking at drafting tight ends, I'm asking myself, okay, aside from volume, who is going to be a big red zone presence, and 2, who has the ability to create after the catch? And that's really what separates, say Austin Hooper and Hayden Hurst for me from the Hawkinson, Gesicki, Noah Fant guys that have more of the physical tools to really create after the catch, where we know Austin Hooper and Hayden Hurst, that's just not their game. And so that's another reason why I kind of want to break ties in this tier in favor of the younger, more athletic guys, where it's like, if volume's equal, then I definitely want Hawkinson and Gesicki. You can obviously make the case, if Hooper and Hurst are getting more volume, that they're the better picks, but I'm not confident enough to know they are going to get more volume. So I like that athleticism as a tiebreaker, even if it's an inherent bias that I have again.
Yeah, that's all really good stuff. Let's move on to this next tier here, 13 through 19. Starting at 13, we've got Noah Fant, 14, Jack Doyle, 15, Jared Cook, 16, Jonnu Smith, 17, Ian Thomas, 18, Dallas Goedert, and 19, Eric Ebron. I refer to this tier as the sweet spot. If I draft a big five guy, one of the top five that I consider to be worthy of a 2 tight end build, then I'm going to most likely be grabbing my second and final tight end from this tier. If my first tight end comes from the last tier we discussed, 6 through 12, then I'm looking to draft 2 guys from this tier to complete my 3 tight end build. I want absolutely no part of a tight end after this group. I'll say that now before we get into the rest of the guys on the list, but this is really where I want my tight end list to end, is with these guys here.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a tier that you're looking for, especially if you didn't get a top tight end. Like, you're basically going to have to be getting guys from this tier, at least 1, maybe even 2. So again, there's the similar dynamic to the last tier, where I'm looking at volume as well as what kind of touchdown and yards after catch upside. Noah Fant, I told you I drafted him in the Drafters League. I really like what he put on tape in year 1, and I think the only concerns are going to be, okay, they add Judy, they add Hamler, they have Sutton still. Is he going to be able to really produce at a high level? But again, with best ball and how strong he finished as a rookie last year, which we don't see rookies, performing as well as Noah Fant did. So to me, that really points to a breakout. And I'm going to be looking at guys like him, Ian Thomas, Jonnu Smith, Dallas Goedert, over guys like Eric Ebron, who were chasing for touchdowns, Jared Cook, who were chasing for touchdowns, Jack Doyle, who were chasing for pure volume. So again, to me, if we make the assumption that volume is relatively equal in this tier, I'm looking for where's that upside on the bone.
Yeah, that's really fair. And the thing with this tier is that I think it is more volume driven for the most part than maybe the bottom of that last tier we talked about. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all if guys like Jonnu Smith or Ian Thomas, Jack Doyle, if they finished ahead of guys like Gesicki, Hawkinson, and Hunter Henry in a lot of situations. However, they just don't have that upside that those other guys have in terms of touchdowns, in terms of really breaking out. So I believe that's why those guys are in a separate tier from these ones. But these guys, a lot of them are going to see strong volume. Jack Doyle, I expect to see pretty strong volume in terms of Phillip Rivers in that Colts offense. Same thing with Jonnu Smith. Outside of A.J. Brown, Jonnu Smith was arguably the number 2 option in the passing game. He was more productive than Corey Davis, that's for sure. And Ian Thomas, Greg Olsen is gone, and that's a pretty crowded core of receiving options in Carolina, but I think Ian Thomas has some upside for a guy like Teddy Bridgewater, who is, a lot of the time going to be making the safe throw. So, these are guys that I'm comfortable with getting 1 or 2 of to secure my floor, as long as I'm not strictly drafting from this tier. And, now that you're talking about it, I think that perhaps I have Noah Fant in the wrong tier. Maybe he should be in the tier above because of exactly what you said. I do believe that he has the upside to be better than a lot of these guys. He is at the top of this tier, but maybe he belongs right there with the Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki's of the world.
Yeah, and the thing, you give yourself a couple different outs with guys like Noah Fant where, because he can do the yards after catch and really, he can, with a play, Noah Fant can convince the coaching staff we need to feed the guy the ball. We need to find ways to get this guy the ball. Whereas, is a guy like Jack Doyle, are the coaches ever saying to themselves, we got to manufacture more touches for Jack Doyle? And again, I'm not saying that means he's going to be a bad fantasy pick or have a bad season. I just mean that that's kind of the logic I use when I'm looking at upside and how Noah Fant's role could continue to expand as he matures.
Yeah, good stuff. Is there anything else you want to touch on in this tier?
Just the fact that I love that Rob Gronkowski is nowhere to be found.
Well, let's get to him because he is my next guy in part of this final group, 20 through 32, the guys that I want to do everything I possibly can to avoid drafting, starting with Rob Gronkowski at 20. Got Chris Herndon, 21, Irv Smith, 22, Blake Jarwin, 23, Sternberger, O.J. Howard, Gerald Everett, David Njoku, Trey Burton, Darren Fells, Dawson Knox, Cameron Brate, Jacob Hollister. I mean, the guys that close out that list don't even have ADPs, so I think a lot of people aren't going to be drafting these. I just did 32, it's a nice number, but, for the most part, these are guys that I want absolutely no part of. Is there anybody in this tier that you think should be in the tier above that you are going to be looking at, or is this sort of just the avoid at all cost zone for you as well?
No, yeah, I'll push back a little bit and say that I don't mind some of these guys as my tight end 3. Like I told you, I took Jay Sternberger as my tight end 3, where I get my elite tight end, I wait and get someone from that kind of deeper second/third tier, and then I'm really trying to just add a little bit more insurance with some upside as well. So of the names in this range, we don't even have to discuss Gronk from are you actually drafting him, because it sounds like you and me are both similarly down on him, and he will never be available at tight end 20 because
he's going as the tight end 12, an actual tight end 1 right now. It's unbelievable.
Oh yeah, and in the draft that I did a few weeks ago, he went as tight end 5 in the 5th round. So God. The hype is out of control, and so you and I are never going to own him, so I don't even know if there's a ton to talk about, but we could get into it. But the guys that I don't mind taking some stabs on would be Sternberger. It would be Irv Smith Jr., without Diggs there. If Jefferson's slow to come along, Irv Smith is going to be the second target in that offense behind Thielen. Blake Jarwin is another guy where I'm going to use my ultimate excuse cliche card. In best ball, we know Dallas is going to spread the ball around. We saw it last year with Witten and Cobb having big games. This offense is going to be good, and Blake Jarwin is going to have some, big 2-touchdown weeks, and we don't have to guess in best ball when those are, so I don't mind him. I also don't mind Gerald Everett. I like Higbee. I think the market is a little too overconfident on the division of their workload based on their draft and based on how Gerald Everett performed at the beginning of the year. I think these two tight ends could be much closer together. I think Higbee might drop a couple slots and Everett could be up, 5 or 6 slots based on ADP. So those are some guys I would want to take flyers on. I agree with you. I'm not super interested in Howard or Njoku, some of these like kind of backup tight ends. I feel like you're really stretching when you aren't at least drafting a tight end that has a reasonable path to a starting role and a floor of 4 or 5 targets.
Yeah, I agree with that. Pretty much everything you said there. I can see it for Irv Smith Jr., especially out of that group because of, like you said, Diggs is gone and there's potential for targets there. I think the exact opposite about Blake Jarwin. We talked in our wide receiver episode about how Gallup and CeeDee Lamb are even going to be potentially eating off of each other, and if those guys are seeing their targets, at a low level, I don't think that there's going to be much room for Blake Jarwin. Tony Pollard, Zeke Elliott, they'll probably get a couple catches here and there. So, I think Jarwin is realistically the 5th or 6th option in that offense. I wouldn't want him unless I just purely miss out on some guys. I take a risk and wait on tight end. Then I'm going to be looking at one of these guys begrudgingly. But, the only one of this group that I'm worried I might be wrong about is Chris Herndon, because he did have a strong rapport with Sam Darnold in the limited time that we did see them together, but I don't know about that. I'm not too high on the Jets offense in general. I like Denzel Mims and Jamison Crowder a little bit, but I just don't know how many targets we can really expect Herndon to get.
Yeah, I probably have a blind spot with Herndon too. He's not a guy that excites me, but if we think back to last year, I mean, people were willing to draft him even with the 4-game suspension. Like, people were very excited about his breakout. They lose Robbie Anderson. There should be targets there. It seems like Sam Darnold likes him. He probably is a bit of a blind spot for me, and I don't think when we talk about sprinkling in some of these guys as your tight end 3, I can't argue with Chris Herndon as your tight end 3. I think there's some upside there, and maybe the market has swung too far in the other direction after overdrafting him last year.
For me, that's really all. I mean, do you want to talk about Gronk at all? I mean, I think that the reasons that we're low on him should be pretty evident, but maybe they're not, because he's obviously being drafted as a tight end 1 for some reason.
Yeah, I don't get it from like a lot of different levels. Like, one, if you want to talk about, the other weapons in this offense, we've talked about Mike Evans and Chris Godwin as both finishing as top 12 wide receivers. Like, there is no way that those guys pay off their ADP as well as Gronk. Like, something has to give. So then if you're telling me something has to give, that give is either Tom Brady's the QB1, which I don't think is happening, or you're telling me that an old tight end with a history of injuries who just sat the year off might not deliver at that cost. I'm going to buy that. We already saw that the way Gronk was transitioning at the end of the year, he has no more burst. He has no more speed. Like, the old Gronk was sprinting across the seam and really making things difficult for linebackers and safeties. He was primarily a run-blocking tight end at the end of his Patriots career. And I think he's a great run blocker. I think he's going to be an asset for that team, a real-life football asset. But if you think all of a sudden he's just going to walk into that offense and command enough targets to get 10 touchdowns, which is what he'd need to pay off that ADP, when you have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, two incredible wide receivers that are on the come up, I just don't see it. I think his ADP is truly insane. Over every single guy we talked about over these 4 shows, I think Gronk's ADP is the most egregious.
I mean, it didn't seem like he needed to come back. If I remember, he had a really important play for the Patriots in his last game as a Patriot, right? So, he should have just closed the book on a positive note before coming back. I get it. You want to hang out with your old boy Tom Brady in Florida, but come on. I mean, it's just, I don't get it. And in terms of fantasy, I really don't get it, because, O.J. Howard will get targets. Cameron Brate, the guy that nobody likes, the guy that just has seemingly, held down O.J. Howard's breakout year after year, he's going to get targets. He's a productive player. He always kind of has been in a boring kind of way. So, yeah, I mean, I think that both of those guys are likely better than Gronk at this point in their careers. As blasphemous as that may sound, I believe that to be true.
Yeah, and like, it would have been a fine conversation if his ADP was like where you had him ranked. Like, then you could be like, okay, yeah, take a stab. Maybe he, falls into, 7 touchdowns and meets his ADP. But where people are drafting him, like, you do need 10 touchdowns from him. And I say that because he's not going to get you anything after the catch. And when you look at the red zone weapons they have, I just don't see how it's possible unless you are just expecting them to have like one of the most efficient seasons possible and be on like a Chiefs and Ravens level thing. And I just do not believe that, one, Tom Brady's capable of that at this age, and specifically and certainly not Gronk being capable of that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're drafting Rob Gronkowski as a tight end 1, you're not taking him at his ceiling, you're taking him on the roof. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's no upside at his ADP. Like, you're having to thread the needle to hit that ceiling.
Absolutely. Let's move on to our last segment for this series. We're going to do a little bit of comparing different possible tight end groupings that are realistic for you to end up with at the end of a best ball draft. Just sort of take like an overarching look at it, and then we'll get Peter's opinion on which build he likes more. I've got two different groupings here, so we'll get into that right here. So let's do it. The first group. is a scenario where you start your roster with Travis Kelce. Now, Travis Kelce and DeAndre Hopkins have almost the exact same ADP. So in this scenario where you start your league, you're probably top of the second round, you're grabbing Travis Kelce. And then, maybe in the mid-range, you're going to end up with a guy like Terry McLaurin as your wide receiver. And then you finish it off with a 2 tight end build. You've got Jack Doyle. Now, conversely, say the same exact scenario, you go with DeAndre Hopkins over Kelce, and you end up with a mid-range tight end in the range where McLaurin is going, say, Evan Engram. And then you grab 2 guys to make it a 3 tight end build in the end with Jonnu Smith and Blake Jarwin. So, would you rather have Travis Kelce, Jack Doyle, and Terry McLaurin, or DeAndre Hopkins, and then a 3 tight end group of Evan Engram, Jonnu Smith, and Blake Jarwin?
This is a very good question because it's almost like a trick question to me. My brain wants to say, I like the idea of the Hopkins, Engram, and then that pairing. It just sounds like better. But from what I know about win rates and elite tight ends, RotoViz actually just had an article where they showed that an RB tight end start has the highest win rate of any other positional combination for the first two rounds over the past 5 years. So to me, that's what's anchoring me back to that. I love the idea of I get my running back, say at 112, and then in this hypothetical, I'm getting Travis Kelce there at 2-1. So I'm getting an optimal construction. Then I'm nailing a wide receiver that I love that's entering a second year when we know productive rookies are the most likely to have second year breakouts. So I love that. And then the only thing that gives me a little pause is Doyle's not my favorite, but
sub him out with anybody you like.
Yeah, so if I sub him out with someone else in that tier, maybe Hunter Henry or Fant falls a little bit. Actually, Hunter Henry's not falling, but let's say Noah Fant. Give me that one from both an upside and general roster construction standpoint.
Okay, I've got one more for you, and this one's going to be a little bit more curtailed. I've gotten to know who your guys are over these past few episodes, so this is a very Peter-centric question. 2 tight end build. You start off with Mark Andrews around his 33 overall ADP. You finish off your tight end with Mike Gesicki in the later rounds. So, say you took Andrews in, the late 3rd, early 4th round where he's growing, and then you're going to grab a wide receiver in that range like Courtland Sutton. Okay, so on one side we've got Mark Andrews, Mike Gesicki, and Courtland Sutton. On the other, instead of Mark Andrews, you opt to go with somebody like, say, Juju Smith-Schuster. And then you're going to go with 3 tight ends in this situation. You still get Gesicki, and then you round it out with, say, TJ Hawkinson and Eric Ebron, which is very realistic in terms of ADP. So, would you rather have Mark Andrews, Mike Gesicki, and Courtland Sutton, or Juju Smith-Schuster, and then a 3 tight end build of Mike Gesicki, TJ Hawkinson, and Eric Ebron?
Yeah, I'm gonna stick to my guns. Like you said, I've kind of revealed that I'm maybe a little higher than market on Mark Andrews. I do believe he's going to make the leap, and I think he justifies that early tight end pick. And I like Gesicki, Andrews, that's music to my ears. I think that's a great 2 tight end combo, and then you're throwing in another elite receiver in Courtland Sutton, where I don't think that I do prefer Juju over Courtland Sutton just straight up in a vacuum. But when you're price sensitive, I think that it's a pretty close tier, a flat tier. And so I'm not seeing enough boost of Juju over Sutton to take me off of Mark Andrews and what I think is the more optimal overall construction.
Okay. Well, would it change for you at all if it was a guy that you liked a little bit more than Juju, maybe, in that same range? I don't know, Allen Robinson or A.J. Brown or somebody like that?
No, I think I'm still, these are, I definitely have my guys, but I do think I do a decent job of just staying anchored to what the data has showed with win rates and how important those early tight ends are. And again, it's not like in your scenario, I'm not even having to reach in the second for Mark Andrews. I'm getting him early 3rd, which is about where his ADP is. So I love that. If I can start, because that really allows me to, like you said, I can get a running back, I can even get another wide receiver and then hit my elite tight end. Like, I just love what that construction does for me. And the other thing when you think about it, right, is when we don't draft a tight end early, we don't have that information. We don't know when we're going to take our first tight end and how that's going to impact the rest of our build and where else we're going to need to take them. When you shore up, those two, that start of the running back, the bell cow running back, and the tight end, the elite tight end, that really opens us up for more best player available type drafting. Whereas there's scenarios where if you don't take that tight end early and there's a tight end run, all of a sudden you are having to reach for one of those guys in that tier where we find it flat. And so I think there's some additional optionality that going early tight end gives you that is maybe underrated from a construction standpoint.
All right. You've said it all. You've done it all. I appreciate you taking the time to do these 4 shows with me. Had a lot of fun doing it, talking, through all these positions. It was a great time. And that is all we've got for this series. If you're in these best ball drafts on Drafters, make sure you go back. We touched in depth on every single position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and now tight end. You've got the information to go out there and dominate these leagues, and I suggest that you do. If you liked what you saw, hit that subscribe button. We're going to have a variety of best ball centric content coming out throughout the off season, so drop a like, leave a comment. If you have any feedback, we'd love to hear it. And for the final time, please follow Peter Overzet on Twitter. If you're not already at Peter Overzet, you can find me on Twitter at Ben Hauver. And that's all we've got. Any last words, Peter?
No, man, this has been fun. I'm definitely amped to do some more best ball drafts after talking through all of this. And, I think we mentioned it on the first show, but if you are on top of these things and you have, conviction in your player evaluations, like, now is the time to do drafts. I mean, every year I end up doing these high stakes drafts, like right as the season is about to start. The ADPs are obliterated. The market is so efficient. The information is so widely available that everyone just drafts incredibly sharp by the time the season rolls around. So if you enjoy this and you feel like you have a grasp on the market and the player evals, jump in now, because you aren't going to get the prices that you're seeing now in another couple of months.
Absolutely. And I think the numbers back that up, that, it's oftentimes you're going to be most profitable. I mean, I'm sure it varies person to person, but I think that, like you said, the ADP gets so efficient by the time late August, September rolls around that your biggest edge is going to be drafting now. And I believe the numbers back that up as well.
Yeah, definitely. So, thanks for having me. This is a fun show. I've loved the Drafters platform. I think they're doing a good job over there. I know they recently rolled out the CSV import, so if you do your own rankings like Ben, you can import those in for every draft. You change them in your Excel or whatever, you just re-upload the new file for your next draft, and you don't have to worry about drafting off a ADP or someone else's pre-draft ranks, which is really nice.
Yep, it's great stuff. Once again, Peter, thank you, and to all the listeners out there, we will talk to you again soon.